Jonathan Parker had built an empire. His name carried weight in boardrooms, stock markets, and political circles. But no matter how much success he achieved, one shadow never left his life: the loss of Eleanor. It had been 19 years since the love of his life passed away. 19 years of unanswered questions. 19 years of a hollow existence, filled with wealth but devoid of meaning. Even after all these years, he had never stopped wondering. Could I have saved her? Was there something I didn't know? But he had long accepted that some wounds never heal. Or so he thought. A glimpse of the impossible. One evening, Jonathan found himself at an upscale restaurant. It was supposed to be just another business dinner, until he saw her. A young waitress walked past him, smiling at another customer. He hadn't even looked at her properly, yet something in his heart jolted. A forgotten melody played in his soul, a whisper of a memory that had been buried for almost 2 decades. When she approached his table, his world stopped. "Good evening, sir. May I take your order?" Jonathan felt the air leave his lungs. She had her eyes, her delicate features, her voice, so eerily familiar that for a moment he thought time had folded in on itself. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for the menu, using it as a shield. His mind screamed at him, telling him it was impossible. Eleanor had died, and yet here was a girl who looked exactly like her. "Sir," she asked again, her head tilting in concern. Jonathan forced himself to regain composure. I'll have the usual." She smiled politely, but her brows furrowed for a moment before she walked away. His heart was racing. Who was she? Was this just a cruel coincidence? Or was fate playing a hand he wasn't prepared for? That night, sleep never came, unraveling the past. The next day, Jonathan did something he hadn't done in years. He sought out the truth. He returned to the restaurant and waited until her shift ended. As she walked out, he approached her. "Excuse me, miss. What's your name?" She hesitated before answering. "Emily Carter." "Why do you ask?" Jonathan felt a shiver crawl down his spine. The name didn't ring any immediate bells, but something about it felt familiar. Over the next week, he became obsessed. He hired Mason, his most trusted investigator, to dig into her past. Mason returned with a thick file, placing it on Jonathan's desk. "Sir, there's something unusual," Mason said. "Emily Carter. There's no official record of her biological parents." Jonathan frowned. "What do you mean?" "Her birth records exist, but they were altered. The only thing we know for sure is that she was born in the same hospital where Eleanor died." Jonathan felt as though the ground had been pulled from beneath him. "You're telling me this girl was born the same day Eleanor died?" Mason hesitated before nodding. Jonathan leaned back, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. His mind swirled with questions. If Emily was born that day, then who was she? And why had her birth records been hidden? A trail of secrets. Jonathan couldn't let it go. He searched for Dr. Reynolds, the doctor who had treated Eleanor in her final hours. The old doctor had retired long ago, but when Jonathan finally found him, the man's expression turned grim. "I was expecting you to come looking one day," Dr. Reynolds admitted. Jonathan's stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" The doctor sighed. "Eleanor, she made a decision before she passed." Jonathan clenched his jaw. "What decision?" Dr. Reynolds hesitated before handing him a sealed envelope. "She left this for you." Jonathan's hands shook as he opened the letter. "Jonathan, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And I'm sorry. I never wanted to leave you with questions. But I had to make the hardest choice of my life. When I found out I was pregnant, I was overjoyed. But then, the doctors gave me another piece of news. I was sick, and I had to choose my life or our child's. I chose her. I told the doctors not to tell you. I knew you would have fought for me, but I couldn't let you make that choice. I wanted you to have a life free from guilt. She was born early, and she was weak. The doctors weren't sure she'd survive. I thought it would be easier if you never knew. If she made it, I wanted her to have a chance at a life without the burden of my death hanging over her. So, I made the hardest decision of all. I asked them to let someone else raise her. Her name is Emily. If you ever find her, tell her she was never unwanted, that she was never a mistake, that she was loved from the moment she existed. And Jonathan, if you can, forgive me. Eleanor. Jonathan's vision blurred as he gripped the letter. For 19 years, he had grieved Eleanor. For 19 years, he had believed he lost everything. But he hadn't just lost Eleanor. He had lost their daughter, a father's redemption. Jonathan didn't waste another second. He went straight to the restaurant, waiting until Emily's shift ended. When she finally walked outside, he called her name. She turned, looking puzzled. "Mr. Parker?" He held out the letter. "Please read this." Emily hesitated before taking it. As her eyes moved across the words, her breath hitched. Tears welled up in her eyes. This can't be real," she whispered. Jonathan's voice was thick with emotion. "It is." She looked up at him, pain and confusion battling in her gaze. "You mean to tell me my whole life was a lie?" "No," Jonathan said softly. "It was protected." She shook her head. "Where were you? Why didn't you come for me?" Jonathan's throat tightened. "I didn't know, but I know now. And I swear to you, I'm not leaving again." Emily stared at him, her expression unreadable. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, finally, she spoke. I don't know if I can forgive you." Jonathan swallowed the lump in his throat. "I don't expect you to, but if you let me, I want to make up for lost time." A long silence stretched between them. Then, with slow hesitation, Emily nodded. And for the first time in 19 years, Jonathan Parker felt something he had thought was lost forever: hope.